Okay, so for this, I guess exercise, this book hang, I was thinking about doing books that I've been trying to read during quarantine. And I don't know about you, but my focus is a little all over the place. So it's kind of hard to focus on one or two books. So I was going to show you my by the bed pile of books, which I'm going to bring out. And then most of them they have a connection, most of it. And it's some things that I think about a lot in my own work, which has to do a lot with landscape and I guess, yeah, mostly landscape. And which is actually, like I've been interested in this idea that there is a difference between land and landscape. Landscape is always a perspective. There's always like a person looking at something, and it's framed a specific way, and it's like political. It's it has all of the things that it's not a neutral point to talk about landscape. It's always from a specific point of view. So for a few years now, I've been reading. Well, it started with this book, which is a fantasy book that I cannot. Is this the first one? This is the first one. It's a trilogy, and it's called the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, who's this amazing writer, and it's sci-fi fantasy, and it's about a lot of things. What is this book about? It's about the end of the world, but it's about one end of the world, or the end of ends of worlds. The premise of the book is that the earth has gone through many, many ends, and this one is the last end of the world. And it's about this woman who is part of this group of people. It's set somewhere in the far, far, far future, where our own present is almost like prehistory. It's like 30,000 years from now. It's not very specific, or at least the way I read it. I read this last year, and I gave my sister copies of it, my copies, and then I just bought these, and because I wanted to read them again. This woman is an origin. It's spelled Oregene, and it means that they have these people have this power to move earth, to move or to control. They feel the earth, and they respond to it. They can start earthquakes. They can also stop them, and they're both revered in this society, and they're also feared, so much so that they're almost like slaves, because their powers are too strong, and some of them don't even grow to be old, because like when you're a baby and you have this thing, you don't know how to control it, so you start like these disasters without knowing, because your instinct, it's like a flight or fight kind of instinct, where if you feel in danger, then you start like an earthquake without knowing. So anyway, the reason why I was into this book, I was interested in geology, and the N.K. Jemisin is an expert. She might as well be a professor of geology, because she talks about Earth as she mixes like all of these mythology that she's inventing. She also talks about actual rocks and their makeup and their behaviors, their different qualities. It's really great. Anyway, so
you got to where, sorry if I ask, you got to where because of her background? How did you get to the book?
It was recommended to me by someone because I was interested in geology and earth sciences, but also sometimes trying to read that stuff can be too dry. And I'm I'm interested in those things, but as an artist, really, where sometimes like when it gets too science heavy, I get lost because it feels like there's like a lot of background that I don't have. So it's kind of hard for me not only to understand it, but also to be to keep my interest. And this book kind of just touches it, but also touches and uses other techniques to like I guess another thing, I'm interested in land and earth, but I'm also interested in those things as a staging for mythology, how we make up our mythologies in the world. And this one is basically has all of that all in one. So yeah, it was because I wanted to just think about earth, and my interest in earth started with this book, which is like this is like kind of, what would we call this? What is the category? Cultural studies or critical theory? And this, for a while I was into space stuff and I was just like learning about black holes and like what is a star? What is space-time, all that stuff. And then there's part of me that just wanted to come back to Earth big time, because I just wanted to come back to Earth because I love Earth so much. And I feel like I think about it a lot now that it's in danger. And this guy literally talks about that, kind of like coming from the stars and crashing back into Earth. And he's actually talking about climate change and this idea of the Anthropocene, which is like a hot topic for the last few years, about talking about how much we've changed the Earth's surface to the point where there's a whole new geological era that is entirely made up, caused by human and their activities on Earth. So anyway, this is like, I watched this really good lecture that he did, this lecture performance that is kind of introduction to this book. So this is like heavy, kind of timely, we need to think about Earth. So from this, I was like, and I went to fantasy. I wanted to, and so this is, and then the next one is this little book. It's called An Episode in the Life of a Landscape Painter. So in addition to thinking about Earth and landscape, I was also thinking about map making and the history of map making, who gets to make maps, and this is kind of tied to histories of colonialism. And I was interested in these specific individuals who were traveling the world even before colonialism started, and kind of like they're the people who laid the groundwork for these colonial powers to go in and set up camp. And most of them actually started as just adventurers, like explorers, whatever. So this one is actually about, it's a fiction by this Argentinian author, Cesar Aira. I don't know how you say the name, Era. And it's based on an actual person who existed, a painter who existed. His name is Johann Moritz Rugendas. I'm totally butchering these names. But he actually existed as a landscape painter who was sent to South America. And the painter himself came from from a prestigious family of painters, and their family's history, his family history in painting was that they were painters of war. This was before photography, blah, blah, blah. It's like in the 1800s. 1700s for his dad and grandparents, whatever. But the guy himself from this book is from the 1800s. And they started as war painters, but then there was like a period of peace where they went out of business because there are no wars to paint. So they're like, what do we do now? But this was also the era of discovery, where all these people are going to these new found lands, whatever. And he was sent to South America to basically kind of draw what the land looks like. So this book is a fictionalized account of something that happened to him. It also reads like science fiction, because he goes to South America with his friend, who's also a painter, and he he goes in his painting, whatever, in whatever style, and then something happens to him, something that's called like atmospheric. I don't want to say it in case you want to read it. Something happens that in the landscape, he's walking around, and like an act of God, which is like a natural thing, happens to him, and he goes through this like psychedelic experience because of it, and that changes how he paints, and he starts to paint like these kind of more like wilder, whatever, paintings based on this thing that happened to him. And I was interested in this because I was also reading these other accounts of actual explorers who went to Central East Africa, where I'm from, who I grew up studying as like these people who discovered us. I'm like, what do you mean who discovered us? But their accounts are also kind of like dry, and also kind of they're both dry, but also kind of making it sound like these crazy African adventures, and their stories are partially how the West's understanding of Africa, the dark continent, and its inhabitants are kind of based or start from these accounts of these white dudes who went to these places too. Anyway, so I'm doing both. Like I do this thing where I read something that's like historically based, and like these travelogues, these narratives of explorers, and then I like to read something that kind of like fictionalizes that, because again, it's like it's all mythology to me, including the real accounts of these explorers. But I love when people actually take that and mythologize even further what it is to be to move through land, because it's all about moving through land and mapping your movements. Like that mapping actually sometimes turns into actual maps. That's how countries are made. And because of that, I started reading. This is one that I've read like 5 pages, Don Quixote. This other person who moves through land, and is just like a fool. I don't know, misunderstood. I shouldn't even say anything, but I know that I'm interested in this because all of these people that I'm reading about remind me of what I've heard of Don Quixote, and I want to read this. And this was translated, it's the new, well, not new anymore, but it was translated in the last 10 years by this woman, Edith Grossman, right? Yep. And I'm excited this is one that quarantine has made me, I open it, I'm like, this sounds interesting, but then I'm like, I don't know if I have the brain for it.
I have questions, but I'm waiting for
no. Ask questions.
I wanted to know, like, what was the connections between, and if you were already thinking about this idea of land and landscape when you were studying architecture? I mean, like a background in architecture. How does that affect this passion or interest in land and landscape? And were you already having these similar thoughts when you were studying architecture?
I don't know if I was thinking about land. And the only thing that I can say that's connected to architecture is why I didn't practice architecture, which to me was yet another thing to dump on earth, especially, it's like, I've always had this uncomfortable relationship with altering earth, like excavating earth in order to put something that will benefit modern men, especially in the West, because that's where I was trained and that's where I would work. So for me, I've never really thought about it. I don't connect my interest in landscape to architecture. What I actually connected to the most, and the reason why I'm doing it, is actually more nostalgia of where I come from. Really, I don't know, like living in Manhattan in a tiny little studio, and I have an amazing view of the city, but I miss mountains so much. I miss, and a lot of my memories are really tied to land and soil, and like that's just specific to where I grew up, and so maybe like it's like this kind of weird longing for home, which is it's been such a long time since I've been home, so to speak. I don't even know what home is anymore. And I think maybe that's why I'm interested in these people who move through land, are never really settled. Even though the people that I'm reading specifically, I consider them to be villains almost. Some of them, like the painter or the explorers who came to my region to do
Absolutely.
things like that.
That's what they do. Yes.
Yeah. So, but then I kind of flip it and think of myself as like also this nomad in land. Like, what if I can make my own maps based on my own memories and my own narrative? And yeah, so yesterday I was talking to my sister and my brother. We always have these moments where we just kind of start going into some memories that we think about specifically from growing up. And we were talking about specifically this one mountain. This is actually an example of what land and landscape. To me, yesterday something happened that talks about that. So we were talking about this specific mountain that, so like where we grew up, it's like very hilly. So like you can be on top of one hill and then see another hill, and then everything is talked about in terms of hills. Like, what hill are you from? What hill do you go? What hill is your school on? Kind of everything is hill related.
Also, Rome is like divided into hills. It's weird.
Yeah, it's amazing. I never think about landscape. Like, I feel like New York to me doesn't have. It's like there's no landscape. I don't know how to think about landscape. Maybe because I attach it to nature, or notions of nature. So I don't know, but obviously, you know, every place is land and also has the capacity to be a landscape. But anyway, we were talking about this specific mountain that we would see from our home, and it was in the background. I mean, like further away, you know, like how further away the mountains are, they start to change colors. They're like kind of muted, grayish, bluish things. And this mountain was like, all of our fears, for some reason, were based on this mountain. Like, even the way it would rain, the rain always started from this mountain, and you could see it coming towards us. I don't know how the weather pattern worked there, but it was very predictable. You start to see the mountain is going away a little bit. It totally disappears because the rain is starting to make it, to obscure it, and then you start to see this kind of descending or approaching sheet, and you realize it's rain. The sound itself also, you feel it coming from one mountain and goes in the valley and comes to you. I mean, sometimes it would take like a minute for the rain to travel that far. But anyway, we were talking about this, and it's hard. I've been trying to Google this mountain, but in my head, if I Google it, the Google image will look like I remember it from my house with the same. I'm like, I need to find one that makes that landscape, you know, that specific frame. Even yesterday, I went to Google Earth, and I was
was gonna ask, does Google Earth, like, can you find stuff like this on Google Earth?
Totally, but it doesn't look like anything. It has nothing to do with my childhood. It's just like a little, it's a little, let me see. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just literally just that. But it has nothing to do. This is land, and what I have in my head is landscape, because it's that difference than where it becomes a fiction or my point of view from a specific place. So I guess this is a long way to say that my interest in land, I'm sure, has a lot to do with architecture, because I always think in space, but it's more to do with memory and nostalgia and longing for home or belonging. And yeah, it's mostly that. And it just kind of, I don't know, went in different places. I will talk about one more book.
Perfect.
Which, maybe two. There's this other one, Anne Carson, Autobiography of Red, which is a modern or retake or on a Greek story, and it's also about a volcano. Also, I haven't read it, but I started. But I also love volcanoes, because also I come from a very volcanic area. The last one is also about mythology. It's about rabbits. It's like, this is a class, Watership Down. My friend Blue gave this to me at school at Bard, because I was talking about, I love rabbits and thinking of them in landscape, thinking of them as this trickster, characters that also very mythological creatures, but I love reading about them and their relationship to their land. So those are the books I'm reading right now.
That's I love all of that breaking down. What do you usually use books for? Of course, as like a research, I assume, as a general thing, but when do you have like the desire, like even when I was asking you last year before you were going to Bard, what were you working on? What were you planning on working on while you were there? You said, I'm mostly planning on reading, which is a very like unique way of seeing, like, okay, now I have 3 months of studio time. What am I going to do? Read. It just doesn't feel like what somebody would normally do. And so I wonder, like, when do you pick up a book? What brings you to pick up a book from your shelves?
Well, I don't know if I told you that before my first summer at Bard, because there's no time to read there. I didn't end up reading that much, but I mean, there's a lot of reading, but you end up doing a lot of stuff that, for me, I think it's like this, I have a very complicated relationship to making things. And maybe that's why, even though I studied architecture, I actually never did, because there's like this fear of objects that I have. And I use books because books are, this could get deeper, because like this is a conversation I've been having with other Bard people, especially with school being suspended now, and what does it mean to make art now. And some sculptors are actually interested in switching to writing totally, because you could be a sculptor, but just through words you can describe things. It's the same thing for me, like with filmmaking. I think it's like it encompasses everything. But I personally use books, both, yes, like you said, research, but also as procrastination to, I'm always researching so I can make the most this thing that's in my head. It's also an escape, especially now. I have these other books that are very, very heavy and about what to do about climate change, about blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, oh my God, I can't handle this in addition to everything we're going through. So I tend to do books like fantasy or fiction or children's books, even, whatever, or regular fiction, to kind of go in another place. It's like another way of being a nomad for me is through books. I'm also interested in them as objects. Like a lot of things that I'm doing are, even my objects really are paper. They want to be books, like for example, or they want to be texts, texts that are kind of bound a certain way. So like scrolls from me are one idea of a book, or a way of binding lots of pages into one object. It's an object. So I studied them for the actual object that they are. It's an architecture, not to sound corny, but so I enjoy them both for the content, for the escape, for the research, but also for what they look like as objects. And they don't have to be interesting looking. Like a regular book just gets me excited just to look at it.
And what's one last question? What's like an early book that like you feel like you picked up and then it kind of like gave you these understanding the books could have been like a useful tool for you beside, we all like were given books in school and but because of that we end up hating a lot of the books that are maybe great. And I just wonder, what was a book that you actually picked up that either you picked up yourself or somebody gave it to you and you were like, oh yeah, this is what books are?
Like in my childhood?
In your childhood or an early memory. It could even be like 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Something that you were like, yes.
Well, I would say actually something, I guess I haven't thought about this, but I could say that, so Burundi, where I'm from, was colonized by the Belgians, and a lot of the intellectual legacy is also Belgian, a colonial legacy, I guess. And so I grew up reading Belgian comics, which at the time were amazing, but they're super fucked up. Maybe you grew up with this too, Tintin. Did you read Tintin growing up? No? Tintin was like
so. Maybe I don't know. Maybe we called it differently. I don't remember.
Yeah, but he actually, now that I think about it, is basically like a lot of these guys that I'm reading about. He was like this reporter, this Belgian reporter who would go to different parts of the world he was a reporter, but he basically was like a detective and solved crimes. But there are 24 books in the series, all of them written in the 50s all the way up maybe to the 60s. And he would go to different countries. So there's like Tintin in America, Tintin in China, in Congo. And all of them are super, super fucked up. Every stereotype that you can think about of any of those places, it's there. But I love them, like the way they like no one told me to read those things critically. It's just like in retrospect. But it's a comic book. It's a European graphic novel. Like the style of drawing, and it was just, each cell was just so beautiful to me and simple, and then you feel like you're learning about the world, even though you're basically being conditioned to be just a terrible person. Like I remember reading the one that was set in the Congo, which actually later was banned. They stopped reprinting it because it was that messed up. And the Congo, mind you, is like a neighbor of Burundi. Like it's on the west border. And I remember there was like the Congo that from the book and the Congo that I thought I knew. But in the book, it is the worst stereotypes of Africans, especially colonial subjects, because the book was written when Congo was still the Belgian Congo, which was basically the personal property of King Leopold. It wasn't even a colony that was owned or managed by the whole country of Belgium. It was just the property of one
the king.
dude. Yeah, who used one of the explorers that I'm reading about to lay out the land. But I didn't realize that. I was like, wow, these people are crazy looking in this book, and these Congolese people. And but I think actually that had a lot of impact for me, because it's like this one guy going from one place to another, talking about, you know, solving crimes and writing about it. And to me, he's like yet another explorer, adventurer type who.
So I see the connection, obviously.
Yeah,
very strong.
Like we're supposed to respect them and like them, but in the end, they really are the villains, you know.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Yeah, I had more, but I think that talks about it. That talks about what I'm into right now.
That was great. That was really good. Cool.
That's it.